Hello and welcome back to Analog Comics. I was supposed to do this video a bit earlier, but then the corona finally caught me, so I lost kind of a week and a half there, but I'm better now. The meaning of this video is to present the question, what is bande dessinée? And although it might feel like a simple thing or a simple answer, I don't see it that way. It's actually a term that I almost never use. And so this is as much me asking about that from you, just to have a conversation about the thing. And I started thinking, why am I not using the term bande dessinée? You know, people think that, it's a European thing and you're from Europe, so on. But I started thinking about the term and the reason why I'm not using it. And when I asked myself, what is bande dessinée? I came up with three answers. The first one is pretty obvious, and I think that's what people most think about it. The second one is such that it kind of destroys the answer for the first one. And the third one is what I think is the most important one as an answer. And that kind of destroys the second one, the second answer, and rebuilds the first one. So these are more like thoughts, I think, than facts. And I'll go through them so that I'll first give the first answer, which is the easiest one, then the second one, which is a more vague thing, and then the third one, which I think it's the most important thought within a bande dessinée. So let's start with the first answer to question, what is bande dessinée? For me, the first thing to come to my mind is that it's the French comics. And to be more exact, it's the Franco-Belgian comics. And in fact, if you look at the Wikipedia, it explains that the bande dessinée, BD for short, is the same as the Franco-Belgian comics. And it also states that they are usually in France and made for France and Belgian readers. It even narrows it in that way. And there's even historical explanation for that very narrowing definition of the word bande dessinée. Basically, bande dessinée is just a word for comics in France. It means, it means drawn strips. So there's nothing that special about the wording itself. It was coined in 1930s, but it only became popular in the 60s. And back then, the whole French comic scene was very much controlled. The laws they had basically prevented comics from outside entering France. Specifically, that law was made specifically for the US comics. That it was very hard for them to get into the country. So that boosted a lot the country's own comic scene. And it also affected the Belgium scene, which was mainly selling to France in the French-speaking areas. So I myself, I wouldn't be surprised to hear people referring to any comics that originate from France or Belgium as a bande dessinée. But the bande dessinée term becomes difficult the second you step outside that scene, those countries. Like bande dessinée, that term doesn't really exist in Finland. I think now the comics fans know it. If you're into comics, you must have heard of BD or bande dessinée, even in Finland. But if you ask regular people, I mean my 75-year-old mom, if I would ask her what is bande dessinée, she wouldn't know. However, if I would ask her, do you know what is manga? I think she would have an idea. Probably she would mix that with anime, not knowing the difference of what's anime, what's manga, but she would be familiar with the terms. But bande dessinée, no. And that leads to my second answer to the question of what is bande dessinée. I follow a lot of comic book related channels in YouTube, and quite many of them are from USA. And they usually talk more about the big two, Marvel and DC, the superhero scene, or then it's Dark Horse or Image if it goes outside that genre. And of course manga is big everywhere at the moment. But usually when they brought in the table the word bande dessinée, it's used as one term to everything European. It's like Bande Dessinée equals European comics. And that's when it starts to itch me, like rub the wrong way. Because French, the Franco-Belgian scene, although it's very important, it's the most important comics scene in Europe, it's not European comics. It's not everything. It's just a part of it. Although Europe is a big market, it's still a collection of small countries, many more smaller countries that are all very different in their cultures, in their languages, and also how they approach comics. And most of the countries have their own particular comics that are made uh, inside the country, in-house, and they are popular. Some of them are only popular there and not outside in other countries, but they are still meaningful and important in those markets. And the fact that they are smaller things than the Franco-Belgian comics, like in Finland we got, let's say, Moomin, it becomes even more important to our country, to our culture, to make that distinction that this is a Finnish comic. Moomin is from Finland, because there are less such examples available, so they become more important in a way. And I also believe that all of the European countries have their own word for comics. Like, let's say in Finland, we only have one word for comics. It's sarjakuva. It's kind of a funny word because it literally means like a serial picture. And that's like not in plural, it's in like just one picture, but in series or serial. I don't know how you do that in real life, but that's the name of comic book in Finnish. And the only thing that is used outside that one word, sarjakuva, the Finnish word for comics, is manga. That is something that is become known all over the world. So that's very well marketed. But bande dessinée is not used by any news outlets or so. But back to USA with the terms, like with them, when I follow their channels, they usually, when they talk about comics, it's clear that that word means DC or Marvel, the superhero comics. Even sometimes in the discussion comments below on the videos, there are some people who, they're like language police. They make very sure that when you say the word comics, that means that you refer to superheroes. Now, I don't know how that works for me, because we only have in Finland that one word for all the comics. And the only English version I know would be comic or comic book. Well, there is the graphic novel. Even that doesn't have a translation in Finnish. The graphic novel. I think it's more like a US term that means something else than superhero comics. But what I'm trying to say here is that the terms, they were coined back then, at the beginning of the comics, quite a long time ago. And the world around them has changed. Like the bande dessinée, it was coined in 1930s, became popular in the 60s, and it became popular in a climate when the France market was very protected by law. But now it's 2022, and it's pretty sure that they have an influx, a kind of wave of other comics coming into local companies releasing comic books from other markets too. Or then they may have foreign artists coming in and publishing through their local publishing houses. So as their world has opened too, to allow other things in, when does it end? When the comic book becomes a bande dessinée and it's not anymore, how far you have to go for it not to be bande dessinée? I think many times the US readers think it's the album format. Of course, that was made popular in France and through France, but the album is such that as a format, it has spread out throughout the whole Europe. It's in use in all of those countries. There are other formats too, but album is still the most recognizable. And if that would be the reason, if you say that, okay, it's in album format, then it's bande dessinée. Then we would have to consider things like Donald Duck. I mean, car bark stories were also years and years ago. I think even in the 70s, they were published in album format in Finland. I wouldn't think that for a second as a bande dessinée. It's an album format, but it's still a car park story. Okay, now you might think that, okay, but it wasn't originally even published in Europe. Those car park stories first came out in USA. What about the other duck artist, Don Rosa? His works, they were originally published by Egmont in the Danish company. Would they make it as a bande dessinée? Okay, then you might say, okay, but the artist, he's from USA. It's not like all a European thing there. Okay, but what about then these albums? Like the Man of Adventure. These are clearly albums, right? Coccobill. But these are from Italy. These are Italian albums. Still albums, but I wouldn't call them bande dessinée. Okay, but then you could narrow down the rules even more. You'd say that they have to be Franco-Belgian comics completely. I mean, the artists and the writers have to be also from that area, and they'd have to be first published in album format. But that would mean that we would have to leave out Asterix, Tintin, Clifton, Alex, Johan and Peewit, the start of the Smurfs, Natasha, Yokochuno, Blueberry, Spirou, Valerian, Lucky Luke, and so on. None of these originally were published in album format, which I will talk about in later videos. So I'm just stirring the soup here, trying to make this a bit difficult maybe for a reason, but that's how the terms are. They are coined somewhere, but then the world around them changes. Am I against the bande dessinée term? Of course not. I mean, I am for the European comics. I would love to have people all over the world get to know more about European comics. And bande dessinée, whatever it means factually, it doesn't matter if it has this very tight definition. It's clearly different things in different countries. It's also the best thing we have for marketing the European comics. It's a one word that is most known. I usually just use the word European comics, and it covers everything from Europe. But that's because I want to speak for all of the European comics. But as this video series is mainly focusing on the Franco-Belgian comic scene and how it started, how the whole big explosion happened, I cannot avoid the bande dessinée term. So I need to talk it open in a way and what I think about it. And it is still by far the best known term to describe anything about the European comics. Of course, we can say European comics, but that's a bit boring. I mean, manga, that sounds cool. And I think that's one of the reasons why bande dessinée has caught on, because it's French and that must be cool sounding, especially for if you're not from Europe. Some other countries further away, the French language is always like a classical and romantic. So maybe that's one thing. So far I have given these two answers. The first was the easy one, you know, bande dessinée, it's the Franco-Belgian comics. And then my second answer was that it doesn't really mean anything. It could be the whole European comics, it could be the albums as a format, and then again not, because albums can be anything. And just trying to bring out the fact that the term is not that clear anymore because the world has changed. But what about the third answer? And that is the most important, I think. This is where the French, the whole Franco-Belgian scene is completely overshadowing anything in Europe. And that is the culture. For me, bande dessinée, most of all, it represents culture of comics. And if you go to France or Belgium, you come to the country where reading comics is actually cool. I mean, it's okay for you to have your suit, the best suit on, and you're sitting in a metro or bus and you're reading Tintin or Spirou. You don't have to have the biggest classics of books in your hand to look smart or acceptable. Whereas, let's say in Finland, for example, if I say the word in Finnish about the comics, sarjakuva, the first thing people think, most of them, they will think about Disney, Donald Duck. That's the biggest comic thing in Finland, has been for several decades. And the fact that most of the people here lost their contact to comics when they grew up. Of course, we, the fans of comics, we know that it's maybe because they don't know that there is now good comics for all the ages. And you can have romance, action, anything you want. Anything you like in the books or movies, you can find in comics. But still the fact remains that comics is a hobby for us childish weirdos in Finland. And that's how it is in most countries. I bet that if you are from USA and you say comics, people think that, oh, he's reading about those muscled people in the spandex, you know, the superheroes. And they feel that it's even more childish. And this is where the Bande Dessinée outshines everything. The French and the Belgians, they really love their comics and they respect that. They also understand that it's a big possibility of export of their own culture, and even the government is included in this effort. In fact, in the Franco-Belgian scene, the Bande Dessinée is on a pedestal that unlike anywhere else. It's actually even thought as a form of art. And it's one of the things that I will talk about in my later videos. And I think that concludes the question, what is Bande Dessinée? For me, it's first and foremost, it is that respecting culture around the comics. You don't have to be a fan of comics over there, but you still respect that. You know that this is normal and acceptable in social norms. I know that many people of my age, if they would see my comics collection, they would be like, oh, you read comics, which in Finnish would translate, you know, that word sarjakuva. It's kind of as a word, it doesn't mean something cool. They might even feel better about if you'd say manga, but that sarjakuva doesn't do that. And I think Bande Dessinée is still the most respected word for a comic book because it holds in the whole culture. And the closest thing that would be the manga, I would say. You won't hear me talking about Bande Dessinée after this a lot. I'd rather talk about the European comics, or then I just narrow the Franco-Belgian scene as a Franco-Belgian scene. That's just the vocabulary I'm using, but I'm not against the Bande Dessinée. I would love it to be more popular and draw more attention to the whole European comic scene. And while waiting that, I would love to have our word for comics, sarjakuva, to become more respected and have that same kind of glow and status around it. Okay, that was me just letting my brain freely go out there and say what I had about this Bande Dessinée thing. Let me know your thoughts about the whole term. How would you define it? Have you ever thought about it, or is there a need to define it very clearly? And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.